Welcome to Market Access Today. Please get ready to be captivated by expert insights and explore new frontiers. Traditionally, I want to thank Econics for their unconditional support. So let's get started. At today's Industry Talks, Dr. Stefan Walzer will be with me. Welcome, Dr. Walzer.
Thank you for having me, Osnur.
Thank you. He is the CEO and founder of Mars, Market Access Pricing Strategy, as well as the founder of Max Insights. He's been teaching market access and negotiations since 2012. He's also the core inventor of Market Access 4.0. Today, we are hosting him for a glimpse into the future of healthcare innovation, especially with AI. First, I want to give you the floor to tell us more about yourself and your career journey, please.
Yes, of course. Again, thanks a lot for inviting. Thanks a lot for having me. It's always good to, let's say, to share some of the steps. I mean, we have all taken, but it's also obviously good just to generally discuss about, let's say, the latest trends and news in the industry. So, I mean, what about myself? I mean, I started, as probably most of us, somewhere at university, right? By studying. I studied economics, where I, to be honest, haven't had really the idea to directly jump into the healthcare industry. I was rather looking a bit more into, I don't know, investment and banking and all that kind of stuff. And then, suddenly it was around the kind of first burst of one of the new economy bubbles. I was always looking as well around. You also learned a lot about new different areas at the university. So I'm still happy that let's say even by chance I just read a quite nice article in a newspaper about a small consultancy, I think which was now bought I think already 4 or 5 times in the meantime, which was just located very close to where I was growing up in the southwest of Germany, and that was also where I was just getting a bit more into the details after my studies of economics, just to see what was basically being done. And the methods were very similar. What you do in economics, would you then also apply in health economics? So I applied there. They were as well just looking for somebody with a bit of more statistics, the econometric kind of background, what I did quite a lot at the university. And that was my first job. And I mean, the first job was also, and especially, I mean, that was a long time before anything like the German AMNOG or whatever. UK NICE was just quite new, with just, let's say, launch end of the 90s. I mean, that was the early 2000s. So that was still quite new. I was doing quite a lot of health economic modeling as well as that at that time. And of course, the US was also there, already the biggest market. I did a lot of quantitative analysis, demand estimation, willingness to pay, and the like. While I was working there, I was also then doing and writing my PhD in health economics with different papers there. I did that at the University of Zurich, and then I moved, let's say, out of the consultancy and was joining the industry or public information. I had been at Roche at different, let's say, levels, always in the area of market access, health economics, pricing, where I had a lot of great mates, a lot of great bosses and people around me. So I learned really a lot. And around the same time, obviously, Germany has evolved a bit more into a, maybe call it an HTA country with the AMNOG. And that was where I was also working quite a bit with the German affiliate to prepare some of the dossiers of already existing or new drugs, because obviously I could read and speak German. I had as well the kind of relationships within the global organization. And of course, I had as well very good relationships with the Swiss and the Austrian affiliates as well. So that was also a bit of the time when I was more thinking what might be maybe potential next steps. I mean, either within the industry, I was also looking there around. I was speaking with a lot of different people, maybe even going for a while into the US. I mean, it was different kind of times, right? But suddenly I was also and always having the idea of maybe going kind of on my own, right? So run my own kind of business, which was always a bit of an exciting kind of thing, right? So after that, and after a couple of further discussions, also obviously in the private life, right? I was basically leaving and was founding Mars, as you said. That was in 2012. So within the first year of the AMNOG. And I was firstly basically running on my own for quite a while as a freelance. And after I just saw that, let's say, the amount of work, and obviously, whoever has seen already an AMNOG dossier, it's a lot of work. It was just impossible, basically, to do it just on your own anyway. But even within a network, it was already getting a bit more difficult. So I started to hire the first very few people, very selected. And in the meantime, we're still a small team. I mean, we're 12 people now, but that was the kind of start. And with Mars, we have always been focusing on the German-speaking markets, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, even though that in the industry, I gained a lot of experience on a global level. So worked with a lot of different kind of countries. I think the most interesting one was even I was kind of attending a price negotiation in Korea, right? So you couldn't understand any word. So it was back office and all that kind of stuff, but it was very exciting because it was so different to other kind of environments, other kind of countries. So I learned there a lot, which I was also then applying, obviously, in my new life, also now with the team, and of course, and I think some of the stuff what you or what we will also discuss in the next couple of minutes is also that we have, let's say, moved in the last years also a bit more into the area of market access 4.0, 4.0, right? So basically trying to apply some of the new available, especially artificial intelligence or larger language kind of models. So that's me a bit in my career journey. I think I'm also teaching a bit at different universities, but I mean that's more because I like to speak and discuss and obviously as well teach to the young people to the next generation. So that's also a bit of my hobby. But that's me in a bit of a bigger nutshell.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We appreciate you sharing your varied professional journey. You seem to have a very busy schedule, and I wish you well as you face these heavy duties. Okay, my first question is about Max Insights infrastructure. What is Max Insights? Could you please provide a brief overview of the platform?
Yes, absolutely. So also there, the Max Insight is let's say our very first, I just need to think about it, but it was the very first new platform what we have developed, also including a proportion of artificial intelligence. However, when we started to have that kind of idea, and the idea was coming out of the point that we have done a lot of early reimbursement and market access plans. So either when companies are still around phase 1, phase 2, or obviously also for medtechs when they're, let's say, shortly before they, let's say, run at least into the kind of a registrational kind of studies. So they wanted to understand a bit how the market looks like and which kind of reimbursement pathways, et cetera, et cetera. So we have done a lot of those things as well. A lot of times also, especially smaller companies need that, for example, in discussions with investors as well. So which would also mean they would need to have the results a lot of times in a very short time frame. So sometimes even within a couple of days, which was a couple of years ago still quite difficult to achieve. It was possible, right? But it made a lot of effort. That was number one. The other thing, we have also worked a lot with our good friend Ron de Graaf from the Netherlands. He's very, very experienced. I mean, he was even working already, let's say, in the area of healthcare when I was still in kindergarten. So quite experienced, and I love to work with him. So that was where he was bringing as well a lot of projects in there. He's more Dutch and a global expert. And then we had a lot of joint projects. And we came up with the same kind of idea. We need to, let's say, streamline that a bit more also for the clients, make it simpler, make it easier for both sides. And before a lot of those large language models we now all know with Gemini and ChatGPT and whatever were available, we were more firstly developing simple kind of questionnaires, right? Simple questions, what we always ask the clients, right? Which data are available? Do you have randomized clinical trial? What about, I don't know, whatever, importing, exporting kind of strategies, financing, setting up a company in Europe and whatever kind of stuff. So that was the first idea, and we put that then as well into a kind of simple questionnaire. Was the first platform. We call it was Max Insights 1.0, right? Everything's still more, let's say, not so much handy and everything still, let's say, driven by the user themselves, right? Not even, let's say, reaching to the point to search for codes or the like. Obviously, a lot has changed. We also followed anyway the artificial intelligence developments. And that was then the time when we thought, you know what, we need to, let's say, bring it to the next level. Because I think somebody will do it anyway. And we had as well, at least with this one, I think, one of the first ideas as well. So we have basically stopped with 1.0 and put a totally new system then together. And Max Insights, as we have it now, is basically three different items. The three items are, from my perspective, the core components of any reimbursement plan. So the first one is really checking for the potential payer acceptance of your clinical evidence. I mean, first one, I normally take it as first, because for me, the clinical evidence is the first one, but there might be discussion around it. But nonetheless, this is a key component of it, right? What does that mean? If you have, for example, a TTP available, meaning just a plan how your study looks like and how your product might perform, you could just simply enter that. Not a lot of details needed. It's really more top level, right? It's not about the exact endpoints, for example. It's more about, is it a patient relevant endpoint or is it rather a surrogate endpoint? Everybody can basically answer that, right? The same for the safety component. And then you get already a first score. That model has been based on what especially also German health insurances have used a long time. It's also published, and it gives you kind of a score. And with that score, it's not so important if you have now, for example, a 5.0 or a 3.0. It's more the kind of question, are you rather on a positive side and rather quite away from the zero? So the higher the point estimate, the higher the likelihood of being accepted by payers, or if you're more on the negative side, meaning your study is maybe not ideal from a payer's perspective, right? Just to give you already a bit of a feeling. So this was the first part. Then we had the what I normally say it's the middle part of it is then probably more data driven then. So first estimation on epidemiology and everything around codes. ICD codes, procedural codes, inpatient codes, including euro, dollar, whatever amount, outpatient codes, anything further related to that kind of coding system. And this is obviously, when we have done it still, let's say, by hand, right, on our own, it was still quite some effort. Even if you have known the kind of indication. I mean, it was very specific. You need to check it back and forth, which one could be combined or whatever. So for that, we have used and applied then artificial intelligence, meaning it's not only that the AI is suggesting kind of key clinical terminologies when you, for example, enter, I don't know, breast, and then you just start with cancer or prostate cancer, right? It gives you the right kind of clinical terminology. So you can just click on that, or gives you basically an offer, right? It's like Googling, right? If you start typing in, I don't know, Osner Sehun, and then you get a lot of different kinds of suggestions, right? So market access today or whatever kind of stuff, right? So you can choose it then. This is the cool point. But even better from my side is you do not only get a list of different codes which might be applicable, you also get then a score, meaning the AI suggests you which might be the most applicable one given the search you have done. So with that, you have already two key components of that, which means you have a first assessment of the payer acceptance and everything around the code, and or if you need, for example, we have as well prices for drugs in there. With medical devices, it's a lot of time very difficult. A lot of time it's confidential with hospitals, but where applicable and available, it's in there. So you have two key components already. And then the third one is obviously because for some of the products where you say, I'm not okay with the code we have, meaning I need to have maybe a higher kind of reimbursement amount, you need to apply for that, right? But as we all know, the processes are, let's say, not only complex by itself, but there might also be different kind of processes and steps and pathways, right? So it depends a lot of times. Is it an inpatient, an outpatient thing? Is it a medical aid? Is it a digital one? Is it a drug or whatever? So that is where we have, let's say, as well included the different kind of pathways that people not only have the, let's say, the kind of theory with the codes and whatever, but also how to implement them as well, the new product in that market in the early phase. So that's basically Max Insights. We also have what we normally call it, a glossary to the country as well, to every individual country. So meaning if somebody doesn't know, let's say, how the Spanish system is basically organized, everything is in there. Or if somebody doesn't know what, for example, a NUP stands for in Germany, you could as well open it up and you can look for it. So that's a kind of a package in the early stages that you can start working on it in order to plan and prepare your market access launch. That's Max Insights. And the idea also, because it's obviously as well the kind of questions, well, how do you use that, right? We have two different, let's say, kind of three different ways to use it. One is that companies or people could still, let's say, request a report as they have done it in the past. But the reports we offer are a lot cheaper than the human-driven because it's just faster and we can just utilize a lot out of the system. And obviously, we could also deliver it within 48 hours if needed. Or the other point, that's also what a couple of users are doing. They basically as well get a license. So they can get and dig in there on their own. So they have an annual license and then they can get in there whenever they need. For example, if your boss has a new idea around a clinical study, or if you then need to switch maybe to another country, you can as well do that one. So that's the second one. And the third one is even very simple. If you have a simple question, sometimes companies only need, for example, I don't know, a handful of codes in one country. We can also answer that within, let's say, an hour, for example. If it's a very simple one, we just charge them for an hour, send it back to them so that it's really simple to share the information. So that's a bit the idea around Max Insights and that platform.
Thank you, Stefan. I wanted to actually ask the next question about the stakeholders, but you have already answered a little bit of it. But maybe if there is something, if you would like to add, so some details about how it benefits the stakeholders will be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think if I would be coming back to my previous life, so before I, let's say, founded Mars and was going again into the consultancy, so in the industry, I also had, besides, let's say, preparing dossiers and doing negotiations and all that kind of stuff, we obviously also got a lot of different early compounds on our desk, right? Some were even in licensing, or obviously some were just coming out of research, right? And then obviously commercial needed to have a kind of idea in which countries they could potentially launch it, maybe first as a kind of sequence, right? Meaning what would be the likelihood for an acceptable price within a given kind of acceptable time frame for that reimbursement process, right? And finally, because that's all linked to each other, what would payers say about our clinical evidence base? Or if it's in the very early stages, how should I, let's say, plan my clinical study program in order to have payers accepting it? So that was always a kind of question. We had a lot of those besides the kind of, let's say, standard work with our, let's say, already launched or pre-kind of launched kind of product. And that is where we have done a lot of those plans as well. And my point, and again, I'm coming back to my friend Ron, he did that as well already even earlier, but we always had the same questions, right? It was always going the same kind of route in a way. And obviously, we know the markets, we know the countries, right? So for us, it's a bit easier. We know where to find it. But if you get a lot of requests, it's still piling up, right? And the second one is obvious as well, when you get, for example, from a client's perspective, if you need to wait quite a long time, it's also a bit tricky. So again, from my side, when I did it on my own, it was quite simple because I just need to find a time slot, right, to do it. But even that was in the industry a lot of times very difficult. So sometimes I still gave it out, or it was maybe indications where I was not that familiar, for example, or where we bundled it with some other kind of tasks or market research, stuff like that. So then we still gave it out to some of the consultants. But the key issue as well, when you're sitting in the industry, and that's still the same thing, it costs you a lot of money and it also takes a lot of time. Meaning, if you need to have a reimbursement plan, you normally wait, let's say, 6 or 8 weeks, and that's already probably fast. I would say the average is probably more around 3 months. So 3 months versus I've been sitting, and industry people are doing that as well. They're sitting in meetings where the feedback is just, give me now the answer, or at least next week in the next meeting. They will not wait for 3 months a lot of times, right? So what do you do then, right? Then you start doing and digging around and calling maybe people and getting stressed or whatever. But if you have the system, you can at least say, look, give me time until next week so I can digest it. Maybe I still need to do maybe 2 or 3 phone calls to get a bit of the details of it or whatever. But I have it for next week. And I can even prepare quite nicely and freshly a good presentation. And it's still cheaper. So it's a bit of we're coming out of the health economic, let's say, school, or coming out of the health economics. So it's always the kind of question, where are you on that plane, right? So it's not even cost effective, it's cost saving, right? So it's better and it's cheaper. So that's a bit maybe where I think a lot of the stakeholders can and are currently benefiting from the system.
That was great. So my next question is about the other platform that you provide AI-based solution to the industry, which is DOBO. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing it right. As far as I know, it's a novel way of creating reimbursement dossiers with an AI bot. Could you please walk us through that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, also when you follow, let's say, the life cycle of a product, I mean, we have been focusing with Max Insights quite a lot now in the early stages, right? So it's planning and what should I do and what do I need to do. But the next step is obviously, and that is where even more kind of what I think clients and we have as well experienced pain points happen around the development of the dossiers. So the dossiers which need to be submitted to the payers, right? Different requirements, different lengths, different things what they want and need to see. And that is where we as well, that was a bit after Max Insights, where we as well just said, look, I mean, with the new AI and large language models available, there needs to be a bit more than what we now do. I mean, if you start to write a UK NICE or a French or German dossier, I mean, you normally, let's say, need to start with that whole kind of process at least 12 months before you submit. And that's probably just, I mean, if you had maybe one or two randomized clinical trials. If you would be thinking about, I don't know, the cardiovascular area or diabetes or whatever, I mean, that's even longer, right? Because you have a lot more RCTs, you need a meta-analysis or whatever. So that is where we just thought, okay, we need to fine-tune that a bit further, need to utilize platforms and models which are now available. And that is where we have developed the DOBO. So we have just, I mean, that was coming out of the, let's say, more working title. It was Dossier Bot, so DOBO. And we finally let it there. And we're just, okay, now it is, for us, it was the DOBO. It was always the DOBO. So it was quite simple. So the process is as well, let's say, more, if you would be thinking as being the senior medical writer, and you would have a new colleague joining, a junior one. That is very similar or a similar kind of process what you would imagine for the DOBO. Meaning the DOBO is your junior, he's sitting there and he's just asking, what should I do? Everything is let's say, planned. So we included all of the prompts. We did a lot of prompt engineering with the different kind of pre-trained language models. By the way, all safe and secure. It's not interacting with the internet, meaning you can upload whatever you want and need, also non-publicly available information, because it's not being shared with the outside world. So that's obviously a big difference to the ChatGPTs and the Geminis of the world. But coming back to the kind of, let's say, walkthrough, I mean, how would you use it? So what you would basically do is you would give the DOBO your clinical and publication kind of basis, meaning, for example, your systematic literature search. We use there, for example, I mean, there are different ones available, but we have as well a cooperation, for example, with Nested Knowledge, where they have as well an AI to run the systematic lit search, which gives you as well another advantage, right? So once that is through, once you have selected the right publications and maybe some other reports, a health economic report or an epidemiology report, etc., you upload that into the system. It's basically drag and drop. It needs to get into the system. And after that, once it's basically uploaded into the system, it asks you if you also want to tell the system, that's again the junior, senior kind of thinking, ask the system if you want to already tell DOBO which publication should be used in which subchapter of the dossier. Because we have the chapters already in there, right, with all of the subchapters. So it's a bit easier, right? And I mean, we also got the question in the past, but why is an AI is not able or capable to do that? It probably is, but it's obviously like you would tell to your junior, give everything in there. So, you know what? Just write it. Of course, there are sometimes then probably kind of little mistakes or misunderstandings or stuff like that. It's the same thing. That is why it's always better than go through it. You saw it. I mean, if that's already in the title, epidemiology of blah, blah, blah in whatever, then you can click and say, okay, that's for epidemiology. Is the unmet need somewhere else? And for the clinical study, no need to put that into the mode of action or the cost date, obviously. Put it into the medical benefit side. So then you basically apply that can be done also, let's say, step by step, right? Whenever you think it's appropriate. And whenever you think you have the whole basis available, We have a couple of things as well, obviously on the clinical side, with a special table to enter, let's say, which data do you need. For example, in the German context, you have a lot of statistical measures as well to be included. That's something what we normally do as well in an outside workshop, normally half a day or a day. Do that all together. Once we have the data, we fill it in, and then we can also upload it. But once you have the whole pool available, you simply press one button, and then you get a pre-filled dossier within a couple of minutes, meaning not 2 to 5 minutes, a lot of times obviously a bit longer because it's a lot of information, but you're not waiting 4, 5, or 6 months. You're waiting maybe an hour. And then you have your draft. And then obviously you as a senior can go in there, what you also do with your junior, and just check. Right? I mean, okay, what is written there and which ways it's written? It's also a bit of the question, do I want to have that message in there? Do I want to have it a bit more stronger? And then you have also the possibilities to check it subchapter by subchapter. And once the subchapter is okay for you, you could finalize it for yourself as a senior and then also refer it to the next higher level, because then they could basically as well review it. And if they are happy, they could lock it. Then even a subchapter is locked, meaning it can no more be changed. If you go in there and think, I'm not sure if that's really the right thing, what it was written, right? You could also click on it, and the document where it's taken from, even if it's 4 or 5, you need to check them once, right? The different ones. It's basically being opened within the system. It's browser-based, and you can as well read it. So if you think, I need to add something more, or I want to maybe change it a bit, or just simply check it if it's really okay in that way, then you can go in there and also check it and change it in there. Once you have done that through all of the kind of, let's say, subchapters and paragraphs and whatever, and everything's finalized, everything's locked, then there's what we say it's a magic button. So then you press another magic button, and everything turned, at that time it's still everything in English, so global can more easily as well review it. It's also all turned into the local submission language, into the original kind of document. Meaning you have it then, for example, in German, or we're currently as well working on some other country adaptate or some for the country dossiers, where you can then just take that one and obviously still need to do a kind of final language check, as we always do, right? But it streamlines a lot of the development process and also a lot of the review process. So that's basically Dobo. We started with the German one because we are obviously growing out of the German environment. We're currently as well preparing the Swiss one, a lot more easy, the Austrian one, even more easier. But we are also working on the global valid dossier and also, for example, on the joint clinical HTA for Europe, which obviously will also help a lot of that as well further into the future. So the platform is there. We have big vision. I mean, ideally, I would like to have even a real global value dossier, right? A top-level global value dossier, which is then feeding into all of the country kind of dossiers, which would also make the life of all industry kind of persons even further easy. So that's the kind of, let's say, next step after early planning. Then it's writing, which should then hopefully also be no more that painful, that you can really focus more on the strategy and the kind of, let's say, input on the messaging, all of that kind of stuff.
Frankly speaking, that really sounds like magical. So I want to proceed with some use cases without losing pace. Could you please share some real-world applications of these platforms and how they benefit healthcare decision making?
Yeah, great question, obviously. I mean, if we maybe start with Max Insights first, with Max Insights, I think what we have seen a good number of times is, for example, also young and early kind of companies have used that, especially, for example, in front of investors. So if they were asking for another round of investment money, they as well need to show not only obviously market access reimbursement, also other stuff, but a key component is always what is the price and what is the market? And the market means the number of patients, but if you don't get, at least in Europe, let's say kind of reimbursement in the public system, it's getting really difficult in most of the markets, right? Sometimes it depends. It also depends a bit on the product, but it also depends on the price. If you say, you know what, I don't care about the public kind of reimbursement, I just go and just sell it directly to patients, it could be a way, right? But obviously you cannot charge, let's say, for example, 500 euros a month, probably. You could, but then you do not get the number of sales you maybe need per month, right? So if you then get a bit lower and maybe do good marketing, and etc., then you could as well go that path. But ultimately, you have all of then the information available for the investors, and that's also where we have also heard, and we're also working with some of the investors as well, where they just said, look, I mean, even if they don't then understand the kind of request companies what it means from a reimbursement perspective, they started to be more aware of the potential issues, of the processes, of what is needed to really bring down the product to the market. And that helps already a lot, which also brings a lot of more certainty for a kind of product to the investor spec, right? So if they think the product is, let's say, great, and the market might be there because they have really thought through it, also from a pricing perspective, with different kind of, let's say, business models, then they might be more able to give you as a company, for example, the money. So that's what we have heard a lot of times also from different sides, as said already, from investors, but also from companies. Another, let's say, example also, and again, with Max Insight is when you think about medtech companies, especially maybe not originally based out of Europe, for example, out of the US, but also out of, I don't know, Australia or some of the Asian countries, if they basically move finally to the European markets, a lot of times, at least at the beginning, that's normally one person responsible for market access, reimbursement, pricing for all Europe and beyond, right? Yes, exactly. So that person, even if he or she is really experienced in some of the countries, it's just a nightmare. I mean, you cannot know all of the details in Portugal, in Ireland, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and the other 27 plus countries. It's just impossible. So that is where we have as well heard, look, I'm experienced, so I know what a DRG is. I know how payers think. So they go into the system, they can play with it, and if some of the maybe global guys have suddenly a new idea of, or maybe a new kind of product or licensing in opportunity, whatever, they could just say, give me maybe a day or give me a week. I go into the system, I prepare it for you, and I have it ready. So it's also bringing their stress level a bit down, but also at the same time, not only the stress level, but also getting the information to them, right? So they're able to work with it. So that's what we have as well heard a lot of times. And of course, I mean, some of the obvious things are what some companies simply said, look, I mean, yes, I forgot to, let's say, request the money and I need it basically tomorrow. And tomorrow is obviously not really, it is possible in a way, but not really with Max Insight. But we have, let's say, delivered it already within 48 hours, right? I mean, if they called up Monday and we delivered it on Wednesday for 4 countries, I mean, those guys were really happy, right? Because then they could present it on Thursday, even that they, maybe some of those really forgot it, whatever it was, right? Or some just got the request, right? I mean, when I was in the industry, I got a lot of times requests Friday afternoon. Why Friday afternoon? Because it was on a C-level who was responsible for that commercial part. He was flying back to the UK Friday afternoon. So he was sitting at the airport or was landing, right, shortly after 4, and then all of the emails got out there, right? So if you were not, let's say, on the run already, so basically out of the office, you got the request on the Friday afternoon, and normally he just said, look, I mean, I need it by Monday. Have a great weekend. Yeah, of course. So that helps obviously as well a lot. I mean, if you have that information available and you can just dig it out and just say, look, you know, it's C-level, it's not the full details what they need. They just need to understand the important points of it. You have it ready. So that's what we have as well heard from different stakeholders. And with Adobe, obviously, I mean, the pain, what we always hear is systematic search, what we don't do on our own, but I mentioned already our partner, and then digging into the details of the thousands of documents. Find the right information for that little subchapter. Because if that little subchapter is not really filled out correctly, you know, you might get a kind of malus, right? So you might get a kind of worse outcome in your market access evaluation. Or if maybe one of the statistical data are not included there, but it was maybe somewhere mentioned, it's again the kind of issue, right? That's also why it takes so long. I mean, if a human is doing it. But that is where we have as well heard, if you use Dobo, it's not that you have a final dossier. I think that's also from a strategic perspective, it probably doesn't make sense because you always need to have an eye on. And I think, I don't know whether you have seen it, but I think yesterday or the day before, also UK NICE has published that kind of guidance, how to use AI for, let's say, submission of dossiers, right? And that was, I think the key thing what basically stood out for me was, okay, AI is okay, but don't use it as a standalone thing. We always need to have a human in the process. Exactly. And that's what we have here as well. So I think the kind of platforms what we have, they are helping and supporting the humans to really focus more on the core things. I mean, my first boss at Roche always just said, you know what? You were hired to think strategically. So give us the input and take the time to really think everything through. Everything else you can outsource. And that is what we are now doing with AI.
Exactly. That's perfect. So my last question is, I want to ask, how do you see the future direction of market access in Europe? How do you see the evolving landscape, key challenges, and opportunities ahead?
That's a very good one, a very broad one, obviously. I mean, we have EU joint HTA, obviously, which at least still might be kicking in by early next year. I think there's still some packages and questions open. Where I mean, I'm a big European, right? And I love the European Union, but it's a bit typical for that kind of monster, right? It just takes a bit of time. It's very bureaucratic, and we need to live with it, right? There's a lot of great things, but that's maybe a not so good thing. But let's just see. I think this will be solved, I'm sure. It will be maybe taken a bit more pragmatic at the beginning, because ultimately, and that's the important thing, it are two things. One, if you don't apply for the European Joint HTA, there is no penalty. I mean, it said you should or you must or whatever, but if there's no penalty, I mean, it's not a must, right? So still, I mean, I would always advise do it, but if some of these things might be maybe still a bit missing at the beginning, I'm not sure if everybody would really apply for that, right? Or maybe just submit what you have or in your best knowledge, right? And the second thing I lost now, but it doesn't matter. The European Joint HTA also just starts now with a couple of areas, right? Like oncology. Some of the others might be coming later on. Some of the other indications, I think there's a clear time frame. But that's, I think, not the biggest issue, I think. The issues might be starting probably still about around the process of it. Some of it is maybe also around the timing, where I'm not exactly sure if that's really enough. For example, the short time frame between, let's say, the submission of the dossier for the joint HTA versus the CHMP opinion or the EMA label. If there's a big significant change of label, it might really be difficult to have all of the data and the analysis finally in your EU joint HTA document. But let's just see, maybe there are. I mean, Dobo could help. A lot of other kind of things could help. I mean, let's just see. I think this will be solved, I'm sure. I think the bigger thing for me is really, I mean, how all of that kind of stuff might be, let's say, pulled into European kind of funding and reimbursement. Because the idea is, let's say, to decrease, obviously, double work for the industry, especially, so that not, let's say, or that you would maybe not need to rerun all of the analysis or rewrite all of the same analysis, which maybe all of the countries basically look at, right? That's, I think the idea makes sense ultimately. But ultimately, the money is with the countries. And I mean, what we've seen as well in the past, with the same clinical evidence, you got different outcomes. Sometimes it was because the preference for maybe new products were different. Maybe the kind of political pressure on some of the disease areas were different. Something was just simply the budget. I mean, if I don't have a budget and I cannot pay for it, I could always think that that product is great. I mean, if I want to get a Ferrari and I don't have the money, I mean, I cannot buy it. Very simple. So that, in that way, you would obviously, some people do that, right? And they get in the I don't like the color of red. Yeah, but you could also get it in black. Whatever. So, it's the same kind of thing, right? You try to find the kind of loopholes and whatever, and there is no perfect clinical study. So that's maybe one of the things where I'm really interesting. What also stuck in my mind when we started to evaluate a bit what and how that might, let's say, be working in Europe a couple of years ago already, some of the Spanish guys would always start to laugh. And at the beginning, I was a bit irritated. And they just, you know what? We had that stuff ready on a national level. We had that kind of regional submission. Then everybody thought, you know what? Now we do a national one, that everything's getting faster. Forget about it. Now we have just another hurdle. We have now the national and the regional ones. So that's a bit where I'm not sure if this will not really rather be the case in Europe as well. So let's just see. But I mean, ultimately, I think that's probably the biggest challenge. We see that now with the economy. The key question for me is really how could we make sure that also the big innovation like the CAR Ts and whatever kind of maybe cure of some of the future kind of disease areas can be financed. I mean, when I speak with students, I go into the pricing bit. I always like to ask them about their willingness to pay for different diseases, right? So what about, I don't know, 4 months of more progression-free survival, or, 1 hour less pain, or whatever kind of stuff. And then they start discussing and they get their mindset open. And then I always get in there and just say, okay, you know what? How much would you charge if suddenly a company would come up with a product which would cure metastatic breast cancer? And then you get a big discussion, because some are more rational, where it's it's maybe 50,000, maybe 100,000, but that's a maximum. And then a couple of guys or students, I mean girls, boys, are as well getting in and getting really high. I mean, what about 1 million? I mean, why not 5 million? You're curing a metastatic breast cancer patient. And that's a key thing for us as well in the future. I'm sure we will get products. I mean, we saw it with some of the ATMPs now, where they're already healing awful kind of, let's say, disease areas. I mean, if you get cure of some of the real public health impacting diseases, then you get the big question. How do the companies price their products? It's not about value. It was the same with the vaccinations in COVID, for example. I mean, the COVID vaccination price, from my perspective, were by far too low. If you take the value what you got out of it, right? I mean, for that, you would need to have priced it probably 1,000 times higher. It was not possible. Of course not. Not politically, I mean, not economically, for sure, but just in theory. And I mean, then it's the question, what does a company do if you suddenly heal, maybe not breast cancer, maybe, I don't know, smaller cancer, I don't know. But anything where people are dying 6 months later, 8 months later, 12 months later. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge for me. It's not only in Europe, it's probably across the world. But I think it's getting more difficult also with the HTA kind of processes and requirements, what we are currently seeing. So I think the key point, not only for the industry, but especially for the payers, is also to think about new kind of pricing models, what we have sometimes already seen, right? But at the same time, and that's again coming back to the digitalization, I mean, we need to have a better possibility to share important data, not only claims data like, I don't know, I mean, a patient got a product X and that product was prescribed 4 times. Yeah, what the hell? But I mean, we are tracking everything, right? We can have a smartwatch. We're tracking, I don't know, the blood pressure, my whatever, my sugar level and stuff like that. Why is that not be able to be captured? And then you could just say, look, if you have, for example, in 80% of times, whatever, this or that kind of outcome, then you get the extra amount. For survival, it's a bit easier, but there are other ways. What about asthma or, I don't know, whatever kind of stuff? You can have the data. You just need to store it and you need to be able to share it. And I think that's a bit the way where not only payers, and again, even a higher level, right, where it's probably more the politicians in general would need to think about. So that's, I think, the key pieces, and also where market access will play a key role in the future.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That brings us to the end of our interview today. It has been an absolute pleasure having you with us. So your insights on market access and AI have been incredibly valuable, and I'm sure our listeners will take away a lot from your expertise. I have two more main discussion points with you. One is QBO, the first AI based objection handling platform, and Waffle, a virtual reality genius in an immersive environment with an AI based counterpart. So we look forward to having you back on the show to discuss these innovative solutions you have created. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, take care and stay curious. Thanks,
Thank you.
Stefan.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.